Good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining our webinar, Special Foreign Language Posting Requirements for Employers. As a quick note before we get started, please feel free to submit questions at any time during the presentation using the chat feature on your screen. We will respond immediately to any technical concerns, and we'll try to address any questions you have about the information being presented as soon as possible after the presentation. And without further ado, here's Ashley Kaplan, our in-house senior employment law attorney. Ashley has been practicing labor and employment law for more than 20 years. Here at HR Direct, Ashley handles our legal compliance and also oversees the teams responsible for researching all the posting laws and developing Postregard services to meet our customers' diverse needs. As a special offer to our attendees today, Ashley will be available to provide a complimentary one-on-one consultation about your company's specific posting compliance needs, as well as follow-up to the presentation. If you're interested, please indicate that in the question box, and we will contact you to set it up. And now, here's our presenter, Ashley Kaplan.
Thank you, and welcome, everyone. The goal of today's webinar is to share some important information about labor law posting obligations, specifically when it comes to foreign language postings. And this is a topic that applies to every business, even if all of your employees are proficient in English. And the legal guidelines around this topic can be really confusing, and the laws and regulations have actually changed quite a bit over the years. So we're going to clear it all up for you today. We're going to go through all the factors that you need to consider to determine if you have to post in Spanish. And we're going to look at situations when posting in Spanish or other foreign languages is mandatory versus a best practice. And these guidelines differ from state to state, and in some cases they also vary on a local level when we're talking about city and county postings. And then, like most laws, there's not a lot of consistency between the federal, state, and local requirements. So, as an employer, as a business, you have to be aware of how the federal, state, and local laws work together, and especially when it comes to posting. You need to make sure that you're on the right side of the law when it comes to employment law compliance in general, but specifically when it comes to these postings and these tricky requirements when it comes to mandatory foreign language postings. So today we're going to cover federal, state, and local foreign language posting requirements, and then we're going to wrap it up with an overview of some of the upcoming posting changes that we're expecting in the coming months. We're going to take a look at federal, state, and local laws that have been passed that are expected to affect your postings. And keep in mind, as we're going through the presentation, that there's no need to get overwhelmed with all the legalese and the complexities of posting compliance or the Spanish posting requirements, because we're also going to be telling you about a solution by Postregard that will help you manage all these posting requirements. So you can hopefully cross posters off your list of worries and focus on the more essential areas of HR compliance and running your business in general. So we decided to present this webinar today based on all the customer questions we've been getting around foreign language postings, and also based on the growth that we've seen in the demand for Spanish translated versions of the mandatory labor law posters. So this is actually really not a surprise. If you take a look at the demographics and the growth of the Hispanic population in the United States, and specifically in the U.S. workforce, it's really not a surprise that this is continuing to be a growing trend. So this slide is based on data that was reported by the U.S. Department of Labor, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the U.S. Department of Commerce, the U.S. Census Bureau, and the Current Population Survey. And the data here shows that Hispanics are the youngest and the fastest growing segment of the U.S. population. So back in 2012, there were roughly 53 million Hispanics living in the United States, and that made up about 17% of the population. If you look at future projections, by the year 2050, the Hispanic population is projected to reach about 120 million, and that would make up about 1/3 of the U.S. population. So, growing from 17% to 1/3 of the U.S. population in that short amount of time. Also, as you can see by looking at the numbers here on this slide, the states with the highest population of Hispanics and the largest number of Hispanics in the workforce are California, Texas, Florida, New York, Illinois, and Arizona. What you don't see here, what's not reflected here on the slide, are the states with the highest percentage of Hispanics by population. And those are, there's some overlap, but those are New Mexico, which has about 47% of the population being Hispanic, Texas, with about 38% of the population being Hispanic, and California, which also has about 38% of the population being Hispanic. And looking at the totals for the Hispanic labor force in the U.S., there are actually about 25 million Hispanic workers in the civilian labor force, and that accounts for about 16% of all workers in the United States. The Hispanic workforce, of course, it spans across all industries. There's not, certain industries that we're talking to today more than others. But this slide does show the industries with the highest percentage of Hispanic employees. You can see in the construction industry, Hispanics make up about 24% of the workforce. Then there's agriculture with 22.5%. And the third on the list is leisure and hospitality, where 21.9% of the U.S. workforce is Hispanic. So based on these trends and the growing Hispanic population in the workforce, it's really no surprise that many of you are concerned about complying with employment laws and posting requirements for your Spanish-speaking workers. Like I said, we've been getting more and more questions, and putting all of these numbers aside, the data that we've looked at, like I said, even if you have no Spanish-speaking employees on your workforce, these posting laws still apply to you. There are different requirements if you do have significant number of employees who speak a foreign language at your locations, but what we're talking about today applies to every business. So we're going to jump into the specifics about the Spanish and foreign language labor law posting requirements. But first, I just want to establish the context for this discussion. So I'm just going to give a really basic overview of federal and state and local posting requirements and just labor law posting compliance in general. So first, let's start with a basic understanding of the federal and state requirements. Today's posting compliance environment is more complex than ever. As most of you probably know, all businesses in the United States have to post both federal and state employee notices. And depending on what state you're in, this can add up to 21 individual postings that have to be displayed on your wall, just for federal and state compliance. This includes 6 mandatory posters on a federal level and up to 15 additional posters for state law compliance. So the 6 mandatory federal posters are the EEOC posting, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and that covers the anti-discrimination provisions and affirmative action requirements for contractors, but also the anti-discrimination provisions that apply to private employers as well. Then there's the FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act posting, and this notifies employees about the minimum wage rate, overtime rules, and child labor laws. Next, there's the OSHA posting, and this one highlights important provisions of the Occupational Safety and Health Act. Next, there's the EPPA posting, and this stands for the Employee Polygraph Protection Act. And this posting lets employees and applicants know the rules around lie detector tests in employment. And this one, of course, is mandatory even if you don't use lie detector tests at all in your business. That's a question we get a lot, but it is mandatory for everyone. Then there's the FMLA posting, the Family and Medical Leave Act, and this one gives employees basic information about their eligibility for leave under the FMLA, what benefits they can expect, and it also outlines your responsibility as the employer regarding FMLA leave procedures. And then finally, there's the USERRA posting, which stands for the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. And this notice covers reemployment after military leave, anti-discrimination provisions, and other issues like around health insurance and maintenance of benefits. So those are the federal posters. And then on a state level, like I said, there are additional mandatory posters that are required for every business. And depending on what your state you're in, this can add up to 15 additional posters. And this state law, this area of compliance is really becoming more and more complex and difficult to manage over the years because we're seeing more and more laws being passed on a state level, giving employees rights and protection in employment. And with each new law, there's a potential poster update or a new poster being issued. So the state posters cover topics. Typically, we see state posters covering topics like the state minimum wage rate. As you know, a state can pass a law giving a higher minimum wage rate to its employees. We see a lot of state law posters on fair employment, unemployment insurance, workers' comp, rules around smoking in the workplace, paid sick leave, child labor. And then we're starting to see some new areas where there are postings being issued on topics like human trafficking, expanded family and parental care rights, and also electronic cigarettes, e-smoking in the workplace. And by the way, we're going to get into some of the city and local requirements, but we're seeing a lot of ordinances on a local level that mirror the state laws but give employees even greater protection. And that's why we're seeing a surge of new posters and posting requirements on the city and county level as well. But we're going to get into that in a moment. So one thing that a lot of businesses aren't familiar with is that there is not a one-stop shop for free government posters. And the different agencies do provide the posters. In most cases you can download them for free if you go to the right agency. But there's not a central place where you can get all of the posters you need under federal and state law, and certainly not when it comes to the city-county ones. So there's not a central free resource provided by the government where you can get all the posters you need on all federal and state level. So it actually ends up taking like a lot of resources and some quite a bit of know-how just to get everything you need for basic compliance, just to get started for federal and state compliance. It's one thing if you just have one location to worry about. But for multi-site employers with locations, in multiple states, there's actually across the nation there are more than 370 different posters that are required on a federal and state level. And these posters for federal and state compliance are issued and enforced by about 175 different agencies. So just in one state alone, in any given state, to manage posting compliance, an employer would have to go to up to 9 different agencies just to get the mandatory federal and state posters. And again, we're not even talking about the city and county posting requirements yet. So once we get into city and county, depending on what city you operate in, this can mean up to 7 additional postings on top of the federal and state postings, and then even more agencies to contact and keep track of. So for the most part, these federal and state and local agencies work independently. They don't have work share agreements or sister agreements where one agency provides all the posters that a sister agency would require. There are a couple of states that do a pretty good job of it. In some cases, there's some crossover and the agencies try to help each other out. And you can see on an agency's website where they might have some posters that are required by another state agency. But it's not a complete list. And you certainly don't get the crossover between federal, state, and local. So the bottom line is there's just not a one-stop shop where you can get all the federal and all the state posters you need in a given state for full compliance. So now let's take a quick look at another layer adding to the complexity of posting compliance, and that is keeping up with the rapid rate of change. The changes when the government issues new or updated posters, and the old ones have to be changed out and taken down immediately to maintain ongoing compliance. So labor law posting requirements change frequently, and we've actually seen the rate of change increase to an all-time high over the past few years. So our legal team here at HR Direct monitors and tracks all the poster changes on a daily basis, and on average, we see about 150 state posting changes every year. And then every time there's a posting change or a new poster, the legal team reviews the underlying laws, and we do our research to determine if it's mandatory or non-mandatory. In some cases, a new poster comes out and it's mandatory, you have to immediately replace the old one. In some cases, a new poster comes out, and even though there have been significant changes to the poster, it's considered a non-mandatory change, and your old one is just fine and should remain in place. So we do that research. And we find, I mentioned there are about 150 changes a year. We find that about half, at least half of those changes do require a mandatory update or immediate replacement of the posters. So that's an average of about 75 mandatory state changes a year. Another problem adding to the complexity of posting compliance is that the government agencies that issue these posters don't notify businesses when posting changes occur. So this can be really difficult because the posting requirements and the notice of change can be buried on different agency website pages. There's no alert going out or notification, and then a lot of times you'll go back to an agency website to a certain page where you are used to finding the poster, and that page is still up and active, and there's no indication that that poster is out of compliance. But then if you click around and you look and you research, you find that there's a brand new poster, and it is the correct current version, and the old one is no longer compliant. So, a lot of times those links remain active, and there's just no indication that it's an old, outdated poster. So just, in general, just makes it difficult to find posting changes. It's difficult to interpret whether the changes are mandatory or non-mandatory. Sometimes we've got to dig into statutes or regulations or case law. Sometimes it's just not found on the government websites. And then it's also difficult to find out whether there are compliance deadlines for replacing the old posters with new ones. The compliance deadlines for posting don't always correspond with the compliance deadlines for a new law. A law can go into effect on January 1st. The posting might be required 3 months ahead of that, or in some cases, the agency sort of delay and the posters aren't even out for weeks or months until after the compliance deadline. Adding to this, it's also difficult to tell from the agency website whether posters are required to be posted in Spanish or other foreign languages. This also takes research. A lot of times you'll see that there are foreign language posters available on the government website, but they're not mandatory. They're just there as a resource. But this could take legal research to figure that out. Then other times, there is a mandatory foreign language posting requirement. The statute may say, for example, that the posting must be issued and displayed in English and Spanish, but the poster, the Spanish version, isn't available, or it's not easy to find. It could be on a different link. It could be something that even though the law requires it, the agency just hasn't published it yet. They might just put out an English poster, and then. Again, sometimes you have to look at the underlying legislation or regulations, but we've actually seen cases where there's a mandatory foreign language requirement. The law says it has to be posted in a foreign language, and the agency requires it as well to be posted in Spanish, for example, but the poster is just never issued by the agency in Spanish. The employers are just up to, on their own, it's up to employers to download the poster in English and get it translated or create something if you want to comply with the law. So this is just a visual of the rate of federal and state posting changes state by state. And this is something that we update at the end of every calendar year. So it goes through the end of 2015. And this shows how many poster changes employers have had to manage for each state. So you can see that the states that are in red, those are the states with the most extreme level of change, and they experienced between 9 and 20 posting changes during this time period. While we're looking at this map, we're just talking about mandatory changes that require poster replacement, and we're just talking about federal and state. This doesn't take into account city or local postings or any kind of industry postings or federal contractor postings. These are just your basic federal state. The states that are highlighted in orange had a high level of change with anywhere from 6 to 8 mandatory changes during this time period. The ones in yellow had 3 to 5 mandatory changes, and then there are a few states in blue, and those only had 1 to 2 mandatory poster changes over that period. Because of all the complexity involved in keeping up with all the posters, the rate of change, and the severity of the penalties for noncompliance, everything that we've that we've just covered, because of all this complexity, we developed Postregard compliance protection as a solution to help our customers stay on the right side of the law when it comes to posting compliance. There's really a lot to it. But before I get into the details of the Spanish posting requirements, I realize that some of you attending today's webinar might not be familiar with Postregard or the basic federal, state, local coverage that we offer. So I wanted to give you just a really quick overview of how Postregard works so you'll understand what I mean when I start talking about the basic service, or what it means to add Spanish versions or other options. So when we talk about our standard Postregard compliance protection service, we're referring to the labor law postings that every business must display on their walls to comply with federal, state, and local posting requirements. And the way the service works is we start you out by sending all the mandatory federal, state, and local postings to each of your locations. All the posters are combined and printed in a condensed laminated format, and that's to help save wall space, but also to ensure durability and to protect the posters from being ripped or torn or covered up. All of that is to ensure compliance. And then once you get your initial postings, we take care of everything from there. Our in-house legal team here at HR Direct monitors the posters daily for changes, and whenever there's a mandatory update, we automatically send you the new posters at no additional charge. And that is, no matter how many changes there are throughout the year. The most I've ever seen in one year is 14 changes in one state. But we looked at the map, and you can see the rate really varies from state to state. But no matter how many mandatory changes there are, we do the research. We automatically send you the full updated posters, and there's nothing that you need to do on your part to ask for them or research or request it. We keep the mandatory posters coming in real time. We also provide for our Postregard members a customized members-only web portal where you can keep track of all the changes and the poster replacement activities for all your locations. So you can manage your account. You can see at a glance all of your active locations, which ones have poster changes, what the changes are. You can read about the laws underlying the poster changes, and you can even track your shipments just to see exactly where the poster is, when it arrived, and who signed for it. And then finally, Postregard also provides a 100% compliance guarantee, which is a guarantee against government posting fines. And this means that if you're a Postregard member and you receive any kind of government posting fine, when you've properly displayed the most recent version of our posters that we've sent you, we take full responsibility for the fine. Something else worth mentioning here, when it comes to lawsuits or litigation or any kind of disputes, we also, to help protect you against damages and lawsuits, we also provide complete record keeping. So we maintain for up to 5 years all of your records, so we can provide you with proof and all the evidence that you need to respond to any kind of requests in litigation or any kind of government investigation or audit to prove that you were in compliance, which locations, which addresses had which services, so that you can establish that you were in compliance when it comes to all these posting laws that we're talking about. So now I want to get into the specifics about the Spanish posting requirements. So first, we're going to talk about the Spanish posters that all employers have to post, even if you don't employ any Spanish-speaking employees. There are actually 22 states right now, and also Washington, D.C., that require businesses to post certain postings, not all of the postings, but in these 22 states, certain postings that are mandatory have to be posted in English and Spanish. And that is regardless of your workforce demographics. So even if you don't have any Spanish-speaking employees on your staff, in these 22 states and Washington, D.C., there are certain posters that have to be posted in English and Spanish. It adds up actually to 47 individual postings. So if you do have locations in every state, It's quite a few to keep track of. So, like I said, it's not all the state posters in these 22 states, it's just certain ones, because remember, we talked about how each poster is issued by separate agencies and they have their own laws around it. So the requirements are really different from poster to poster. I did want to point out in Puerto Rico, it's just an exception, all of the posters do have to be posted in Spanish, and that's true even if all your employees at a given location are proficient in English. You still have to post everything in Puerto Rico in Spanish. And by the way, I keep talking about Spanish, but some states go even further and they have requirements for other languages. We've seen up to 11 different languages: Russian, Japanese, Arabic, Mandarin, and Creole is also common. This slide lists out the 22 states that currently require certain postings to be displayed in Spanish, again, even if you don't have any Spanish-speaking employees. If you would like to get a complete list of the specific posters that we're referring to, those 47 posters that are required to be in Spanish in these states, just let us know. You can request it by submitting it as a question in the chat box, or just reach out to us by email, and we'll follow up with you after the presentation with all the specifics for your states. The good news is, if you're a Postregard member, all of these postings are already included in your regular English service. And I know that can be confusing because it's called the English service. And we're going to get into this in a minute, but Postregard does offer different options for foreign language postings. But if you want to add on fully translated posters that are optional and that type of thing. But the basic Postregard service, just your regular federal state Postregard English service, already includes any poster that is required to be posted in a foreign language if the requirement applies to all employers. So, all of these 47 posters are already included on your panels in both English and Spanish. And like I said, I know this can be confusing because we call it the English service, but we believe that, in order to make sure you're entirely in compliance, if this is something that's required for all employers, then it should just be included and not require any action on your part, or any research on your part to let us know or make a decision about what you need to get. It's required, so it's included. So if you're in any of these states, there's really nothing to worry about when it comes to these postings if you have the Postregard regular English service. You may not have noticed, but the postings already appear on your English panels side by side, for each posting that where this is applicable in both languages. The same is true for our city and county postings. Postregard coverage includes all the local mandatory postings, and whenever a local posting has to be posted by all employers in a foreign language, we automatically include that in your English service at no charge. And I'm going to get to a slide in a moment where I list the specifics for the city-county posters and the foreign language requirements. But next we're going to talk about if you do have locations with Spanish-speaking employees, there are some additional requirements that you need to know about. So things change a little bit legally when it comes to your locations with a significant number of Spanish-speaking employees. So first of all, when it comes to the federal poster, the federal combination poster with the 6 unique postings on it, if you have a significant portion of Spanish-speaking employees who are not proficient in English at a location, then you need to post the federal combination poster in both English and Spanish at that location. And this is based on a Family and Medical Leave Act requirement. But the only problem with this requirement is that the law doesn't define or specify what that exactly means when it says a significant portion. The law is silent on what does significant really mean, and I get that question a lot. And there really are no court cases or other guidelines that we can look to specifically that define the term significant portion when it comes to this federal posting requirement. But when this happens, when there's not a clear law right on point, lawyers will typically look at other laws that are similar for a better idea of the intent behind the meaning of significant portion. So as a best practice, if you were to look at similar state and even city and local laws that have tried to define this, as a best practice, it's safe to err on the side of caution and follow the guidelines that are, a lot of the state agencies have been publishing for their posters. And that is, it varies, but it could be 5% or 10% of the workforce. So if 5% or 10% of the workforce speaks Spanish and is not proficient in English, then most companies would go with that as their guideline to post the federal poster in English and Spanish. Again, this is just a guideline since there's no clear definition of what significant portion means. But just to be on the safe side, most employers go with a lower number, like 5%, as the threshold for determining whether to post the federal poster in Spanish. Some companies I've worked with choose to go ahead and post the federal poster in Spanish if they have any Spanish-speaking employees, even if it's just one person who's not proficient in English, just to be on the very, very safe side. I've worked with other companies when they have a big in-house legal department and they've decided to interpret it differently, and I've seen companies use a 20% guideline. So it's really up to your depends on your compliance culture and your attitudes toward risk. But I always like to recommend 5 or 10% as a safe way to go. So that covers the federal combination poster. On a state level, I mentioned that there are certain posters that have to be posted in Spanish if Spanish-speaking employees make up a certain percentage of your workforce. However, there's not a blanket requirement that's written into the law that says you have to post all of your state posters in English and Spanish, even if you employ a lot of Spanish-speaking employees who are not proficient in English. There's just not a blanket law that says you have to post all of the state posters based on how many employees you have who speak Spanish. But as a general rule, most employers who have to post the federal poster in English and Spanish because they have a significant portion of the workforce that's affected, in that case, most employers choose to go ahead and post all of the state law postings as bilingual as well. And it's just a best practice. It would be hard to explain in any kind of dispute why there was a choice made that certain posters were posted in Spanish because we knew that we had a significant portion of the workforce who that is not proficient in English, but then that we didn't take the extra step to post all of the mandatory state posters in the language that we know our employees would understand. So usually when a business has to post the federal because they have a significant portion affected, they go ahead and do full translations of the state posters, although it is not mandatory. It's just recommended as a best practice. There is one exception, and this is fairly recent, and that is for Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, employers who employ Spanish-speaking employees do have to post all of the state posters in Spanish. So unfortunately, the agency doesn't give any kind of definition or guidance around who this applies to. It doesn't even have the standard significant portion like we have under federal law. It simply says that it applies to all employers with Spanish-speaking employees in Pennsylvania. So it doesn't even say that the employees have to not be proficient in English. To be on the safe side, if you have Spanish-speaking employees in Pennsylvania, you should be posting both the federal and the state, all of the Pennsylvania state posters in both English and Spanish. So Postregard offers a lot of different solutions to accommodate your needs when it comes to the Spanish postings because it's really, this could change from location to location. If you have a lot of locations and some of them have no Spanish-speaking employees and others do. So for your locations with a significant number of employees who are not proficient in English, you could select to just have the federal poster as a bilingual English-Spanish and keep the basic English service for your state posters. And remember, when I say basic English service, that already covers you for any foreign language posters that are required for all employers. So if it's mandatory, it's already in the English state service. If you would like to go ahead and post all of the state posters in English and Spanish as a best practice, we do offer fully translated state posters in the majority of the states. And again, that's just an option you can choose to add on to your regular English service if you'd like to. So again, you can pick and choose which locations need the full Spanish service for federal and state compliance. So for example, if you operate in Pennsylvania, you might want to have all of your Pennsylvania locations on the full English and the full Spanish bilingual service for federal and state posters. But then for your locations in other states, you might be comfortable just going with the bilingual federal and the English state service and be, and remain in complete compliance that way. I just want to mention all the options that we're talking about for foreign language are available in all our different formats for Postregard. So, I've been focusing on the physical wall posters, but this also applies to our electronic solutions for remote workers. It applies to our binder service for non-traditional work sites, work sites that don't have walls, like mobile service units. And just a side note here, a lot of businesses still don't realize that you have to satisfy posting requirements for your off-site workers or your remote workers or your telecommuters. And the law says that you have to provide all of your employees with access to the postings, whether they report to an office or work from home. So some of these formats that I've mentioned are just all alternatives to help you comply and get communicate the mandatory postings to all of your workers, whether it's digital or through a binder, if they don't report to a work site with the physical postings, if they don't have access to that on a regular basis. If you do have any questions about any of the solutions that I've mentioned here on this slide, again, just put it as a question in the chat box or reach out to us, and we'll be sure to follow up and give you more information about those. So next, I wanted to highlight a fairly new trend that we're seeing, that we're continuing to see grow, and that's the city and county postings. So there are actually a lot of cities and counties now that require businesses to post mandatory labor law notices, letting employees know their rights under local laws. This slide lists some of the bigger ones and some of the ones that have popped up over the last couple of years. And a few of these on this list actually have multiple postings that are required. Like in San Francisco, I believe there are now 7 mandatory postings. So that means if you operate in San Francisco, that adds up to 28 mandatory postings once you take into account the 6 federal posters, 15 state law posters for California, and then 7 additional posters for San Francisco. So that can really add up. Also on this list, Philadelphia actually has several postings that are required. I think they're up to 6 mandatory posters on top of the federal and state law postings for Pennsylvania. So our legal team is monitoring and tracking these, and this list is quickly growing. I'm constantly updating this for presentations and information. So almost daily, we're analyzing new legislation and new ordinances that are coming out and determining whether they require mandatory postings. And when they do, of course, we're adding them to our offering and getting our Postregard members up to date and in compliance. We've actually had to even add more lawyers to our staff here to help stay on top of this research, and which I think is understandable considering there are about 22,000 cities and counties with their own laws to track. So, not all of them have mandatory posters today, but we're seeing that number grow so quickly. And when we talk about these city and county posters, it's very similar to the state law topics, the things that they cover. A lot of them cover local minimum wage rates. We've seen more and more cities pass their own higher minimum wages that are higher than state law. Cities and counties might have their own paid medical leave rules. A lot of times we see that they will have different discrimination provisions. Like when it comes to discrimination laws, there might be different protected categories. Like, some cities recognize sexual orientation as a protected characteristic, even though under state law it might not be included. So there can really be a lot of different laws that have to be followed and, that are also reflected in the posters. One question that I get a lot is whether you have to post these local posters if they conflict with the information on your federal and state posters. And the simple answer is yes. Cities have discretion to pass laws that are more generous to employees than under state law. States have discretion to pass laws that are more generous than under federal law. So a lot of times you'll see a city that has a higher minimum wage rate than under state law. There might be 3 different minimum wage rates, federal, state, and then city being the highest. Or you can see a city law that has a lot more generous paid sick leave requirement than you'll see under the state law. So as a business, as an employer, you're required to follow the law that is the most beneficial to your employees. So you have to follow the provisions of the law that are the most generous to your employees. But when it comes to the posters, you're still required to post all 3 versions, federal, state, and local, even if they conflict. So you always follow the provisions that are the most generous to employees, but you have to post all of the laws, if federal, state, and if there's a local law as well. So you can see here on this slide that a lot of the city and county posters also have mandatory foreign language requirements. And just by example here on this slide, all of the cities listed here with 1 asterisk have at least 1 poster that has to be posted in English and a foreign language, even if all of your employees read and speak English fluently. So these apply to everyone. In most cases, the foreign language that's required is Spanish, but in some cities it can be several languages that are required. So I put an asterisk here. In some cases, the employers are required to post the poster in English, Spanish, and multiple other languages. So just like we talked about with the state posters, if you're a Postregard member, you will get all the city and county posters you need for your locations, and we'll provide the posters in all of the languages that are required if it's a requirement that applies to all businesses. And that's just automatically included as part of the regular English service. You'll also see here on this slide there are some cities with 2 asterisks, and that means the city has posting requirements for to be posted in a foreign language, but only if a certain percentage of your workforce speaks that language. And again, every law is different on this, so you really have to consider it poster by poster. Some laws will say on on the city level we have a lot more clarity. They will say if you have 5% of the workforce who speaks this language, you have to post, or if you have 10% of the workforce. Most of them are pretty specific. And we can give you more information about this if it applies to you, if you want some more information about any of these cities. And also in terms of what the requirements are, what languages are required, and then we can also give you more information on Postregard and how to get the foreign language versions. We can provide the translated versions to help you comply with these extra requirements if they affect you. So as promised, we're going to wrap up the presentation with an overview of some of the mandatory poster changes we're monitoring right now based on laws that have already passed. And this slide highlights pending poster changes based on federal, state, and local laws that have already been enacted. Laws that are passed, they have effective dates, and they make the corresponding posters outdated. So they will require mandatory poster updates with the new information. Like I mentioned earlier, typically a law is passed and the government updates the poster before the compliance deadline or before the effective date of the law, but that's not always the case. Sometimes the law will go into effect and the government takes a while, weeks or months, to catch up and get the new information onto the posters. So some of these have effective dates coming up in the next couple of months. We're watching on our hot list for the posters to be released. They may be released ahead of the compliance deadlines. They may be released after the compliance deadlines. But as a Postregard member, you'll get the new updated posters just as soon as they come out. Keep in mind on this slide, this is just a list of laws that have actually been passed with actual effective dates. There are so many other bills that are pending in various stages of legislation, federal, state, and local level that could also affect the posters. On a federal level, we know that posters may be affected by pending bills on issues like immigration reform, FMLA expansions, changes with EEOC regulations. And then that's on the federal level. And then, as I've mentioned, on a state and local level, there are hundreds of bills that are pending at any given time that could impact employment laws and mandatory posting requirements. But again, this slide just captures posters that are due to have mandatory updates based on laws that have already been enacted. So if you have any questions about this slide or any of the specific changes that you see here and how they're going to impact your business, just go ahead and submit it as a question and we'll follow up with you, or send us an email and we'll be sure to get back to you with the information that you're looking for. So that wraps it up. I hope you found this presentation to be helpful and informative. I know we went over a lot of legal requirements and details, but there's really a lot to share when it comes to these laws, and especially when we're talking about the specific obligations when it comes to foreign language posting requirements. If you have any questions or would like additional information about Postregard or any of the compliance issues that I've talked about today, please feel free to contact our compliance specialist, Peter Frey, at 954-970-5702, or by email at pfrey@hrdirect.com. Thanks again for attending today's presentation, and we hope you have a wonderful afternoon.